Okay, cool. So today's topic is broader impacts, which is one of my favorite topics. And I like to devote a whole webinar on this because I think it's like probably, it's at least half of the application for the GRFP, the other half being intellectual merits. And it's also the part of the application that really like sets applicants apart. A lot of people are pretty comparable in terms of intellectual merit, but where the reviewers are going to be able to find differences is in the broader impact. So improving your broader impact section is probably the easiest thing you can do to increase your chance of winning. And I will go over how you can do that in this presentation. And also broader impacts is kind of confusing, so I will go over what exactly it means again, just to clarify. All right. Yeah. So broader impacts versus intellectual merit. So I've talked about this before, but basically intellectual merit is the potential of you and your research to advance knowledge, whereas broader impacts is the potential of you and your research to benefit society. So it's advancing knowledge versus benefiting society is the difference. However, even the reviewers get them mixed up from time to time. So I have some quotes from real reviews under the broader impact section. The first one here says, the results of proposed experiments will contribute to understanding of pancreatic islet development. So that's intellectual merit, actually. That's advancing knowledge. And then they go on to say the pathology of diabetes, which could be considered a broader impact. But definitely the first part, understanding of pancreatic islet development, would be an intellectual merit. So it's confusing why the reviewer put that under broader impacts. The second one here, the description of the broader implications of the work are vague, as is the context of the work. What is the outstanding question about the somatic gonad and or FGF that needs to be addressed? And this is also describing intellectual merit for sure. And it is worth mentioning that you do need to describe the broader implications of your specific project in your field, and that's going to go in the intellectual merit section of your research proposal. But that's different than broader impacts, okay? So even though reviewers get them mixed up, most reviewers do know the difference, and they will get you if you try to get away with putting intellectual merit in your broader impacts. So here's an example of a review where the reviewer basically said, the broader impacts as presented solely rely on the intellectual merit impacts that would be subsequent and far removed from the actual project proposed. So make sure your broader impact section isn't just about advancing knowledge, that's intellectual merit, and focus on what the impact is on society, okay? So straight from the GRFP solicitation, NSF values the advancement of scientific knowledge, intellectual merit, and activities that contribute to the achievement of societally relevant outcomes. And they actually give you a nice little list of what they consider society relevant outcomes, which include but are not limited to full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in STEM, improved STEM education and educator development, increase public scientific literacy and public engagement with science and technology, improved well-being of individuals in society, development of a diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce, increased partnerships between academia, industry, and others, improved national security, increased economic competitiveness of the US, and enhanced infrastructure for research and education. So if you or your research can check off any of these societally relevant outcomes, you'll want to include that in your NSF proposal. And there's 3 places where you should be including these broader impacts. So there's 3 ways to get broader impacts. And this is actually straight from the solicitation as well. The broader impacts can be accomplished through the research itself, or it can be accomplished through activities that are directly related to the specific research project you're proposing, or through activities that are supported by but complementary to the project. Or it can be all 3 of these things. That would be the ideal. But certain research topics have more broader impacts than others. So if your specific research topic doesn't have that many broader impacts on its own, then you'll want to beef up the activities that are related to it, like outreach or education. And then NSF also has 4 different broader impacts criteria that are listed here. So that's integrating research and education. So any sort of outreach, mentoring, teaching, advancing diversity in science, and that includes gender, ethnicity, disability, geographic, enhancing scientific understanding. So blogging, open access, any mainstream media would be in here. And then benefiting society, and that could be in terms of public policy, organizations, also just improving people's lives. And there can be broader impacts activities that touch on multiple of these criteria in one. For example, you could be enhancing scientific understanding while you're integrating research and education, or you could be advancing diversity in science while doing outreach, for example. But I recommend trying to make sure that in your personal statement, your proposed broader impacts are checking off all 4 of these criteria in one way or another. And where do you put your broader impact? So each statement needs a broader impact section. In your personal statement, I recommend, you take about 1 page of broader impacts, and you really want to go over all your past activities, even if they're non-science related. So any sort of volunteer work, teaching, or peer tutoring that you've done, you'll want to talk about. And then you're also going to want to describe current broader impacts. So if you haven't already, you should be starting to sign up for some outreach activities or organizations, clubs, anything that you can do. And you need to describe your future plans in detail. In your research statement, in your broader impact section, you'll want to talk about the societal benefits of your research, and also talk about how you're going to share your results, especially with the public and the stakeholders. And if you're going to present research at conferences or deposit data online, if your research is going to train undergrads or train people in underrepresented communities in science, you'll want to mention that. And then if you really want to impress your viewers, then you should propose a specific outreach activity that goes along with your research. And you can talk about this in the research statement and then describe it in detail in the personal statement, is what I recommend doing, because there's more room in the personal statement, because you're probably going to need most of your research statement to talk about your research. All right. Proposed broader impacts. So 1 proposed broader impact is not enough. You're going to definitely want multiple ones. And like I said, it's great if you can satisfy all 4 of the criteria on there. And the holy grail, I think, of broader impacts is to propose a novel activity that's related to your research project. And for this, you want to consider who's your target audience, what's the desired outcome, and if there's any existing resources for you to work with, either within your lab or within your graduate group or school. And also if you're doing outreach, like what specific like high school are you proposing to work with, or community college, etc. And in the broader impact section, you want to make it easy for your reviewers to see all the broader impacts you're doing and to remember what they all are. So I recommend organizing them really well in the statement. So if you've done like a couple broader impacts like in depth, those will probably be like, they'll have a paragraph about them on their own. On the other hand, if you have a bunch of small broader impacts, I would organize them by like category, for example, teaching or communication, and that would be a paragraph. I think it's really effective to use emphasis such as bold or underline, because when the reviewers are going back through your application after they've read it and they're like skimming to see, like, when they're trying to pick who's the best, they can go and see how many broader impacts you have, and it will help refresh their memory to all the broader impacts you've done. And also using lists for planned broader impacts, I think is super effective. I've seen a number of applications that do this, and I think it really just lays out for the reviewer that you do have like a plan for your planned broader impacts, and you are doing a diverse array of planned broader impacts. And I have an example here of a broader impact list. So this one, I've cut out a couple sentences for brevity, but it's from the 2019 EVO-DEVO genetics proposal. If you want to read that, it's on the successful apps folder. And this person basically listed 3 broader impacts that they were going to do. They have OSTEM, so it's Out in STEM. It's LGBTQ organization for grad students. So they proposed to participate in that. Number 2 was leadership in the research community. So they co-developed a student-led seminar on fruit flies, what they called Superfly, really cute name. And the third one is that they plan to do STEM education for incarcerated youth. So they had already gotten involved with a Tutors for Inmates Club, and then this person actually proposed a whole molecular biology module for the club. So I thought that was really effective to just list them all out, and I recommend that you do the same for your proposal if you want. The other thing you should do when you talk about broader impacts is to actually use science. So you can cite peer-reviewed research to support your claims about minorities in science, for example, or specific outreach and communication techniques. So there's a whole field of science that studies like the science of science communication and of teaching, STEM education. So you can actually look and do a little bit of research. Here's some examples from that Evo Devo genetics proposal. So for their Out in STEM club, they cite some research that says that feelings of like being outcast are common in queer undergraduates, and they're less likely to remain in STEM as they progress. So that shows that there is a need for this club that they're in. And then for the STEM and education for incarcerated youth, they cite that education during incarceration is one of the best ways to promote successful transition into work and reduce recidivism, and it's been successful. So yeah, cite peer-reviewed research when you make claims, and it also will, I mean, it makes you seem more, it gives you extra intellectual merit, right? Because you're being scientific about your claims. Okay. So sometimes people ask me if you can have too many broader impacts. And usually I say that no, it's hard to have too many broader impacts. Most people are lacking in broader impacts, the majority of applications I read. But I have seen one case out of all the applications I've ever read where the reviewer commented negatively on the person having too many broader impacts. And that's this quote here. If you want to read the proposal, it's the 2018 cell biology proposal. And so reviewer number 1 gave them a very good broader impact review, and they said that they were worried because given the extensive extracurricular efforts the applicant proposes, it may be necessary to prioritize to give adequate time to research. The other reviews, though, for this application on broader impacts were excellent, and I think the person did a really good job. And she actually, she did all the broader impacts she proposed and also was very successful in the research, so this reviewer ended up being wrong. So I guess you do, that you can go overboard. You do want it to be feasible, okay? So you don't want to propose so many activities that you aren't going to have any time for research. And, you know, it might even be worth mentioning how many hours per week you plan on devoting to different activities. But for the most part, it's hard to have too many broader impacts, I would say. Okay, so there's some other reasons that you might want to do broader impacts besides just trying to get the GRFP. So I was involved with science communication and science fair mentoring, especially in my earlier years of grad school. And I've had other friends who were in science communication clubs, and everyone mentioned how it was really beneficial for their own mental health. And I think part of that is if you're in a club, you have a whole community of other graduate students who are going through graduate school, which is not an easy thing to do. And so you have each other as kind of a support group. Also, what I found is when I was doing outreach about science to high schoolers, that their enthusiasm for science like really helped keep me motivated. And it, like, when I would tell them about my research, they just thought it was like so cool that it, like, I don't know, I took that back into the lab with me and was like, it just like helped keep me motivated. So I think it's doing broader impact stuff is good for your own mental health. It's also really good for your career. So once you finally graduate from grad school and you are applying to jobs, especially if you're staying in academia, something that can really set you apart is having outreach and teaching experiences, especially teaching experience. So it's good to start building these onto your resume now. And then lastly, I think it's really important for scientists in general to communicate their work outside, not just to other scientists, but also to the general public, to the people who are affected by the science. So I think it just makes you a better scientist if you learn how to communicate and you do outreach and do teaching and focus on that. And if you are going to do scientific outreach, you should make an effort to learn to communicate. So there are a number of online communication trainings, and I'm going to share that in the next slide. And then I found this article that described unexpected benefits of science communication training. So they basically found that the scientists who took communication training were better able to convey their research to a broader audience, and also found that they were more confident in presenting their research to people within their fields too. So giving better poster presentations or oral presentations at conferences, etc. And there's, okay, so one of the trainings that I took is this class called Sci-Fund, and they have 5 self-guided classes, and these are all links. So when I send out the PowerPoint, you can click them and check them out if you're interested. But basically they have classes on how to put your audience first, using Twitter or Instagram for science. They have a whole class on posters, and also if you're interested in making YouTube videos about your research, they have a whole class on making video for scientists. Another really great resource is Alan Alda's Center for Communicating Science. So Alan Alda is an actor, and he's also a scientific communicator. And there's a number of recorded webinars on the website there. And if you do any of these trainings, either the self-guided classes or if you like attend these webinars, you can mention that in your NSF that you are like actively training to be a better science communicator through these classes. So something to keep in mind. And one technique I actually learned from that Sci-Fund communication class was this compass message box. And it's just this little template that you can use when you're trying to design like an outreach activity or you're trying to maybe describe your research to the general public. And the idea here is that everyone thinks their research is important. How do you convince other people that your research is important? So the goal here is to try to find your message here. So who is your audience? Like, what do they care about? How can you appeal to them to get them to care about your research? So for example, like when I was doing this for my own research, I'm like a plant pathologist. And so obviously everyone cares about food in general, but I wanted to make it like really specific. And so I talked about, I focused on oranges and coffee, and the message was like, can you imagine breakfast without oranges and coffee? Like, that might be a reality because both of those crops are threatened by plant diseases. And then that kind of gets them intrigued because everyone cares about breakfast. So if you want to try doing this, if you decide, for example, you want to create an outreach activity, or if you want to make a YouTube video or make a blog about your research, you can print out one of these message boxes here, or you can just draw one on a piece of paper and go through the different things. And actually this link here is a whole workbook on how to use the message box with a bunch of examples. So I'd recommend checking that out. All right, final words on broader impacts. Make sure all your proposed broader impacts plans are really specific. So yeah, you want to give the name of the high school you're outreaching to, who you're collaborating with, etc. And remember that most applications are lacking in broader impacts, and a lot of applications don't get funded due to lack of broader impacts. So I have an example from a friend who was in plant bio, and she submitted an NSF as an undergraduate and didn't get funded, and then she actually resubmitted the exact same research proposal as a grad student. And the only really difference she made is she added more broader impacts to her personal statement, and then she got it the second year. So it's obviously an anecdotal evidence, but it can make a difference just by adding broader impacts. I think it's difficult to have too many broader impacts. If I do think you have too many broader impacts, I'll let you know. But most people, I'm probably going to suggest adding more. So you can go wild, get creative, and remember to use your unique background and set of skills in your outreach. So yeah, consider where you came from, what kinds of things motivated you to get into science, like how could you bring that back to the community, etc. Like for example, also if you belong to a group that's like underrepresented in science, the reviewers will kind of expect you to do outreach to people who are also in that community. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because you're part of that community. Yeah, and that is all I have to say on that. We'll take some questions and I'll stop recording.